schools are not immune to prejudices of society. For each child, the social reality outside will also impact what she experiences inside school. There is no reason to believe that there is a connection between what children learn in schools and recent events, such as the lynching of a Dalit youth to date in Punjab, social media tweets against actor Shah Rukh Khan for the arrest of his son, Aryan Khan, and uproar over Fab India advertising Diwali as Jashn-e-Riwaj. Underlying these events are deep-rooted prejudices, stereotypes, expressions of self-righteousness, mistrust, and hatred for those different from us terms of gender, religion, caste, and class. A more appropriate question to ask perhaps would then be, what is the role of schools in the formation prejudices, stereotypes? We must begin by acknowledging that schools are a microcosm of the larger society. If there are cleavages in society, they will get reflected in schools. For example, a Dalit Gillai's experience will be different from a Brahmin boy, even if they go to the same school. This is because, for each child, the social reality outside of school will also impact what he experiences inside schools because of messages, either manifest or hidden, transmitted in schools. Now let us examine how schools treat their students. On the one hand, they have homogenizing rituals such as mandating a school uniform, common assembly, and common modes of teaching, evaluating and disciplining, imposing the same code of conduct expectations from everyone. On the other hand, there are rituals that are meant to mark grade and separate students from each other. This is most evident in the way high achievers are rewarded, made to wear marks of distinction, sometimes even physically separating them from the so-called weaker sections. This would lead us to believe that schools give little weightage to different forms of capital A, economic, social and cultural resources that students may or may not possess depending on where they come from and how that influences their performance in school. Instead of acknowledging diversity, stratification, and associated inequality and discrimination, schools pretend that all is well in the world outside and shut themselves off from divergent experiences that different children may have. There are safeguards in the form of syllabi, prescribed textbooks, and focused examinations that ensure the child's world knowledge, language, culture, experiences is not allowed entry into school. While this is made explicit in all formal and informal communication to students and their parents, there is another way in which most students' experiences are distorted in the classroom. Textbooks, the central pivot around which teaching learning revolves, are responsible for perpetuating symbolic violence against certain social groups living on the margins of society by either ignoring or misrepresenting them. For instance, women and other social groups on the gender spectrum, people with disabilities, hardly find any presence in textbooks. If they do, they are caricatured or presented in a poor light. There are examples galore of women shown as being dumb, people with disabilities as helpless or even wicked, people from lower classes as being dirty and lazy, Dalits as being inferior and deserving of hardships, and Tiarvan as being steeped in orthodoxy and superstition. Minorities, either linguistic or religious, also meet the same fate. Loose, irresponsible statements are made in textbooks, which are then reinforced by teachers in the classroom. Social inequalities present in the real world are thus replicated inside schools. Another serious limitation with our textbooks is the tendency to keep them sanitized, with no mention of any social evil or conflicts. This is done to keep young minds away from the ill effects of all that is bad in society. Ironically, a child experiencing discrimination day in and day out in his real life is transported to a make-believe world where all is well. A child wearing a skull cap being teased outside the class and accused of being a terrorist on entering the classroom reads a textbook, which says, "A Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Isai apas mein bhai bhaiya." Nazia Erum, in her book Mothering a Muslim, based on systematic research in schools across several cities in India, shows how Muslim children are teased by being called a terrorista and a Pakistania. Similarly, a child living a life on the fringes of his village is given to believe that all is well with school and society. Sociologists Murli Krishna and Govardhan Wankhede, in their autobiographies, poignantly present experiences of discrimination and humiliation they faced in their childhood both inside and outside school. Added to this is the pedagogic necessity to passively accept whatever is taught in schools. Prejudices become our lens, shaping the way we look at the world and others around us. As adults, we cling to them as they help us justify our misdeeds against others. The National Curriculum Framework 2005 radically tried to shift the nature of schooling in India. Social science textbooks, particularly social and political life, were outstanding in several ways. Instead of adopting an attitude of an ostrich, they acknowledged inequity in society, brought in subaltern literature and voices, and accorded legitimacy to multiple world views. Contrary to the spirit in which NCF was written, one finds it difficult to understand why sacrifice is espoused and valued in the National Education Policy, 2020. Eklavya's sacrifice of his thumb, as Gurudakshina to Dronacharya, is celebrated in our textbooks rather than being condemned. In a grossly unequal society, it is not difficult to imagine that who will be expected to sacrifice and to whom, and the AWE school and society will continue to engage in acts of violence. While we take pride in inflicting violence on those weaker than us, with each such act, we become more dehumanized. For years, Kim Jong-un forced North Koreans to emulate his style. Now that he has a cool jacket, he wants no copycats. Kim Jong-un, supreme leader of North Korea, just cannot seem to figure out what kind of fashion icon he wants to be. For years, there have been reports coming out of the mysterious, tragicomical totalitarian state of the lack of choice for the people. A great symbol of that unfreedom was the fact that people could only get their hair cut in state-approved styles, and many men and boys were encouraged to emulate Kimai's hairdo, a sort of ball cut with an odd middle parting. It is a hairstyle only a dictator can pull off. Most regular people will be teased out of it. Now, it seems that North Korean authorities have decided that imitation is no longer a form of flattery. Since December 2019, Kim has been seen sporting a leather trench coat. Unlike the haircuts, this fashion choice reportedly has more takers, and many North Koreans have been spending relatively exorbitant amounts. The country has an abysmal per capita income to rock a leather jacket. But it seems Kim now wants to be unique in his look, and the police have been cracking down on the trench coat. Copying his look, it appears, is now an insult to Kimai's sacred personality. At first glance, it appears that Kim is confused. It seems that he cannot decide between wanting to be the leader of the fashion pack or just a cool, leather jacket wearing, James Dean-like lone wolf. After all, if a leather jacket becomes a uniform, is it even a leather jacket anymore? But perhaps there is more of a method to the sartorial diktats. When all people spoke about was a dated, somewhat unflattering ball cut, he wanted everyone to be like him. Now that hair's cool, he wants to go it alone. Misery, Kim knows, loves compa NY. And when you finally get a look right, you do not want any copycats. Explained how, when MPs are suspended. 12 opposition MPs have been suspended for the rest of the winter session for disruptions in Rajya Sabha during the monsoon session. What had happened then? What are the rules for dealing with disruptions? The winter session of Parliament began on a stormy note on Monday. Both houses saw disruptions as Lok Sabha passed the bill repealing the 3 farm laws without any discussion, and Rajya Sabha passed it after a brief intervention by Leader of Opposition Mallikarjun Kharge. After that, Minister for Parliamentary Affairs Prahlad Joshi sought the approval of the House for suspending 12 Rajya Sabha MPs, 6 of the Congress, 2 each of the Trinamool Congress and Shiv Sena, and 1 each of CPI and CPIM, for the remainder of the session. The reason for their suspension was their unprecedented acts of misconduct, contemptuous unruly and violent behavior, and intentional attacks on security personnel on the last day of the monsoon session. So, what had happened in Rajya Sabha during the monsoon session? Parliament has seen continuous disruptions since the passage of the farm laws in the 2020 monsoon session too. When the bills came up for discussion in Rajya Sabha, opposition MPs demanded their scrutiny by a select committee. Amid slogan shouting, MPs hurled papers at Deputy Chairman Harivansh. This led to the suspension of 6 opposition MPs. Parliament passed the bills without scrutiny by a committee. Then, in this year's monsoon session, opposition parties were asking for a discussion on the alleged Pegasus hacking and farm laws issues. When Electronics and Information Technology Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw was making a statement on Pegasus in Rajya Sabha, Trinamool Congress MP Shantanu Sen snatched the papers from him. This was followed by a heated exchange between Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri and Sen, who alleged that the minister threatened and verbally abused him. Rajya Sabha suspended Sen for the rest of the monsoon session. Disruptions marred both houses throughout the session, which ended with a melee in Rajya Sabha. Opposition MPs accused security staff of manhandling them, and in turn, Leader of the House Piyush Goyal accused opposition MPs of attacking the security staff and demanding a special committee to investigate the incident. The session then ended 2 days ahead of schedule. What powers do presiding officers have to deal with MPs disrupting proceedings? MPs are required to adhere to certain rules of parliamentary etiquette. For example, the Lok Sabha rulebook specifies that MPs are not to interrupt the speech of others, maintain silence, and not obstruct proceedings by hissing or making running commentaries during debates. Newer forms of protest led to these rules being updated in 1989. Now, members should not shout slogans, display placards, tear up documents in protest, and play a cassette or a tape recorder in the House. Rajya Sabha has similar rules. To conduct the proceedings smoothly, the rulebook also gives certain similar powers to the presiding officers of both houses. The presiding officer of each house can direct an MP to withdraw from the legislative chamber for grossly disorderly conduct. The MP then has to remain absent from the proceedings of the House for the remainder of the day. The presiding officers can also name an MP for a persistently and willful obstructing the business of the House. In such a case, usually, a Parliamentary Affairs Minister moves a motion for suspending the offending MP from the service of the House. The suspension can last until the end of the session. In 2001, the Lok Sabha rule was amended to give the Speaker one additional power. A new Rule 374 empowers the Speaker to automatically suspend an MP for a maximum of 5 days for disrupting the business of the House. In 2015, Speaker Sumitra Mahajan used this rule for suspending 25 Congress MPs. How often have disruptions led to suspension of MPs? The first instance occurred in 1963. A few Lok Sabha MPs first interrupted President Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan and then walked out while he was delivering the joint address to both houses. Lok Sabha ended in reprimanding these MPs. In 1989, 63 MPs were suspended from Lok Sabha on the discussion of the Thakar Commission report. More recently, in 2010, 7 MPs were suspended from Rajya Sabha for snatching the Womanized Reservation Bill from the minister. Since then, MPs have raised slogans, used pepper spray in the House, and displayed placards. How difficult has it been to solve the problem of disruptions? Presiding officers have grappled with it. Over numerous conferences, they have deliberated on ways of addressing the issue. Former President K.R. Narayanan, who also chaired Rajya Sabha from 1992 to 1997, explained the difficulty involved. In most cases, disorders in the House arise out of a sense of frustration felt by members due to lack of opportunities to make his point or clear his chest of grievances of the people that move him or out of the heat of the moment. They are perhaps easier to deal with. What is more difficult to tackle is planned parliamentary offences and deliberate disturbances for publicity or for political motives. In 2001, during a national conference in the Central Hall of Parliament organized on the issue of disruptions, different political leaders summed up their positions. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee said the majority party is responsible for governing and should take other parties into confidence. He said the opposition should play a constructive role in Parliament and be allowed to put forward its views and express itself in a dignified manner. Sonia Gandhi, the then leader of opposition in Lok Sabha, emphasized that debate is central to democracy, and therefore there should be more debate and fewer disruptions. She identified the reluctance and procrastination of the Treasury benches to face discussions as a cause for disorder in Parliament. She sought the support of the presiding officers to help the opposition in raising issues uncomfortable to the government. Mamata Banerjee, leader of the Trinamool Congress, said that in a democracy, power is transient and that a party ruling at the center may not be in control in the states. She stressed the need for cordial and respectful relations between the opposition and ruling parties. Holding social media platforms accountable for trolls, what a draft bill in Australia proposes. The provisions of the bill allow Australians to make a complaint if he or she has reason to believe that he or she is being defamed by material posted online on a particular social media service. On Monday, the Australian government released the draft of a bill aimed at holding social media companies accountable for the content posted on their platforms and protecting users from trolls. In a statement on the Social Media, Basic Expectations and Defamation Bill 2021 issued on Sunday, Prime Minister Scott Morrison's office said, the refer will ensure social media companies are considered publishers and can be held liable for defamatory comments posted on their platforms. They can avoid this liability if they provide information that ensures a victim can identify and commence defamation proceedings against the troll.a. Morrison said, a social media can too often be a coward's palace, where the anonymous can bully, harass and ruin lives without consequence. We would not accept these faceless attacks in a school, at home, in the office, or on the street. And we must not stand for it online, on our devices, and in our homes. Span. What it proposes. Australians and Australian organizations with a social media page will not be legally considered publishers of content posted there. Australians will be able to file a complaint if they have reason to believe that they are being defamed by material posted online on a particular social media service. Individuals will also be able to give the provider of the service a defamation notice, provided they are able to give evidence that the material in question was the subject of a complaint. Social media platforms will be required to establish a standardized complaints system whose purpose will be to ensure that defamatory remarks can be removed and trolls can be identified with their consent. Social media companies will also be required to disclose identifying details of trolls to victims without consent, which will enable a defamation case to be lodged. The trigger. The bill comes in response to Australian High Court judgment that media companies could be held liable for comments that were left by third parties on their social media pages. Dylan Waller, who was the subject of various news stories about youth detention, had brought defamation proceedings against media companies including the Sydney Morning Herald and Rupert Murdoch's Australian. He alleged that after the media companies published posts about the news stories that referred to him on their Facebook pages, various third-party users made defamatory comments against him. Lawyers for the media outlets, for their part, argued that they could not be held liable for third-party comments since they were not the publishers of those comments. On 8 September, the High Court of Australia ruled in favour of Waller. It dismissed an appeal by the three media outlets against a decision by the Court of Appeal of the New South Wales Supreme Court, which had said that posting content relating to news stories about Mr. Waller, the respondent, on their respective Facebook pages, the appellants were liable for the publication of allegedly defamatory comments that were posted third-party Facebook users in response to the content.a. The statement from the PMA's office quoted Attorney General Michaelia Cash as saying, since the High Court's decision in the Waller case, it is clear that ordinary Australians are at risk of being held legally responsible for defamatory material posted by anonymous online trolls. Reforms will make clear that, in defamation law, Australians who operate or maintain a social media page are not publishers of comments made by OTS.a. Explained, what is the Farm Laws Repeal Bill, 2021? Farm Laws Repealed, what is the Farm Laws Repeal Bill, 2021? Has the government given any reason for repeal of the farm laws? What is the Farm Laws Repeal Bill, 2021? The Farm Laws Repeal Bill, 2021 is aimed at repealing the three farm laws: Farmers, Empowerment and Protection, Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act, 2020, the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce, Promotion and Facilitate Ion Act, 2020, the Essential Commodities Amendment Act, 2020A, and amending the Essential Commodities Act, 1955. The bill was necessitated after Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the government's intention to repeal the three laws in view of ongoing farmers' protests against these laws on 19 November. 2 days after the Prime Minister's announcement, the Union how the bill has been introduced in Lok Sabha. How many sections are there in the bill? The 6-page bill contains only 3 sections. The first section defines the title of the Act: the Farm Laws Repeal Act, 2021. The second section has provisions to repeal 3 farm laws, and the third section relates to omitting subsection 1am from Section 3 of the Essential Commodities Act, 1955. What is subsection 1am under Section 3 of the Essential Commodities Act which is being removed? The government had inserted subsection 1am in the Section 3 of the Essential Commodity Act, 1955 that empowers the government to control production, supply, distribution, etc. of essential commodities. The subsection 1am provides a mechanism to regulate the supply of foodstuffs, including cereals, pulses, potato, onions, edible oilseeds, and oils under extraordinary circumstances which may include war, famine, extraordinary price rise and natural calamity of grave nature. It also prescribes the price triggers for imposing stock limits. Under the subsection 1am, any action on imposing stock limit shall be based on price rise, and an order for regulating stock limit of any agricultural produce may be issued if there is a 100% increase in the retail price of horticultural produce, or 50% increase in the retail price of non-perishable agricultural foodstuffs, over the price prevailing immediately preceding 12 months, or average retail price of last 5 years, whichever is lower. Women farmers at Tikri border. Has the government given any reason for repeal of the farm laws? Agriculture Minister Narendra Singh Tomar, who piloted the Farm Laws Repeal Bill, 2021, has stated several reasons for taking this legislative step. In a statement of objects and reasons, which forms the part of the bill, Tomar said, even though only a group of farmers are protesting against these laws, the government has tried hard to sensitize the farmers on the importance of the farm laws and explain the merits through several meetings and other forums. Without taking away the existing mechanisms available to farmers, new avenues were provided for trade of their produce. Besides, farmers were free to select the avenues of their choice where they can get more prices for their produce without any compulsion. Farmers at Ghazipur border. However, the operation of the aforesaid farm laws has been stayed by the Honorable Supreme Court of India. During the COVID period, the farmers have worked hard to increase production and fulfill the needs of the nation. As we celebrate the 75th year of independence, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsava, the need of the hour is to take everyone together on the path of inclusive growth and development, it said. I view of the above, the aforesaid farm laws are proposed to be repealed. It is also proposed to omit subsection 1am of Section 3 of the Essential Commodities Act, 1955, 10 of 1955, which was inserted by the Essential Commodities Amendment Act, 2020, 22 of 2020. It states how many days the farm laws were in effect. The journey of 3 farm laws began on 5th June 2020 when the President of India promulgated 3 ordinances Essential Commodities Amendment, Ordinance 2020, the Farming Produce Trade and Commerce, Promotion and Facilitation Ordinance, 2020, and the Farmers, Empowerment and Protection, Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Ordinance, 2020. These ordinances were later replaced with proper legislation in September 2020. However, the implementation of 3 farm laws was stayed by the Supreme Court on 12 January 2021. So, these laws were in effect for only 221 days. What next? The Farm Laws Repeal Bill, 2021 will now go to the Rajya Sabha.